What you're about to hear is a first-person confession, inspired by the real story, or perhaps the legend, of the human experiments conducted inside Willowbrook State School. I was told it was a place of care, a school, a sanctuary, a place for children who had nowhere else to go. I believed that once, believed it when I signed the papers, when I walked the long, tiled halls that smelled of bleach and something older. When I watched them lead small, silent bodies into crowded wards where the beds touched wall to wall, they said the disease was inevitable, that the filth was part of the burden, that what we did, the tests, the injections, the milk tainted with filth, was for the greater good. I told myself that too. But it wasn't the disease that hollowed them out. It was us. And long after the doors were locked and the halls went dark, I carried the silence they left behind. Most of them arrived without names. Just case numbers, dates of birth, a brief apologetic note from a doctor or a social worker, sometimes a mother's name scribbled hastily in the margins, already fading. The buses came every week, long grey shapes rumbling up the cracked asphalt road, carrying small passengers who stared out of clouded windows with the wide, vacant eyes of the forgotten. They were left at the gates, handed over with a nod or a signature. Some parents cried, most didn't. Many didn't even come inside. I stood by the intake desk, clipboard in hand, watching them file in, shuffling, limping, trembling. Some were missing shoes. Some were too thin, bones pressing sharp against the thin fabric of their clothes. Others seemed healthy enough, at least at first glance. But all of them shared one thing, the weight of being unwanted. We called it intake, processing, orientation. It sounded so clean, so efficient. But really, it was abandonment. We lined them up in rows, assigned them numbers. Tiny bracelets snapped around wrists. Quick physicals under flickering fluorescent lights. Questions barked out like orders. Can you walk? Can you feed yourself? Do you know your name? Most didn't answer. Some couldn't. Their silence was not the silence of ignorance. It was a silence built from years of being spoken over, pushed aside, institutionalized, without ever being asked if they wanted to be saved. The rooms were already full when they arrived. Beds jammed side by side until the metal frames kissed. No privacy, no space, no comfort. The older children, the ones who had learned what Willowbrook really was, watched the new arrivals with dull, hollow eyes. No welcome, no curiosity, only the tired knowledge that soon these new ones would be just like them. We called it home. We called ourselves caregivers. But the truth was harder to say. We were keepers, guards, custodians of decay. The hepatitis came like a shadow we couldn't outrun. It slithered through the crowded wards, touching one child after another, leaving yellowed eyes and swollen bellies in its wake. Some mornings you could smell it in the air before you saw it, the sweet, rotting odor of sick flesh. Dr. Krugman arrived when the epidemic was already part of the wallpaper. He wore a clean white coat and spoke in calm, authoritative tones. He said he had a plan, a study, an opportunity to learn, to prevent, to save. We believed him because we needed to believe something. So when the orders came down, small doses, controlled exposure, structured observation, we obeyed. We signed the charts. We prepared the doses. We made notes as the first fevers bloomed. It was easier to follow instructions than to question why no one seemed to leave Willowbrook once they entered. Why the children's files collected dust instead of updates. Why the laughter faded faster than the light. Sometimes, late at night, when the hallways emptied and only the low moans of the fevered filled the corridors, I would walk past the intake room, the place where they first arrived. I would find myself imagining the buses pulling up again, new children stepping off, clutching worn toys or broken promises, hoping this place would be different. And I would wonder if, in that brief moment before the doors slammed shut behind them, they felt it too. The shift, The knowledge that they had not been brought here to be saved. They had been left, abandoned to a system that saw their bodies as necessary casualties, stepping stones toward a cure they would never live to see. We told ourselves it was for the greater good. We told ourselves they would have gotten sick anyway. We told ourselves the end justified the means. But deep down, beneath the layers of sterile language and professional detachment, I think we all knew the truth. They weren't left here because they were sick. They weren't left here because they needed help. They were left because no one else wanted to see what happened next. And we, the ones who stayed, became very good at not seeing it either. In the beginning, it wasn't easy. Their cries clung to the walls, high, desperate sounds that no procedure or protocol could drown out. They cried for mothers who wouldn't come back, for homes that were gone, for names already stripped away like old coats at the intake desk. We heard them. We flinched at first. We slowed our steps. We hesitated when the orders came down, the injections, the samples, the endless rounds of charting decline. But hesitation was dangerous. Hesitation meant remembering they were children, so we taught ourselves to forget. We spoke in codes and numbers, never Maggie or Luis, only Unit 17B, Subject 23C. We learned to say clinical decline instead of fevered screaming. We learned to call the seizures expected reactions and the listless stares acceptable baselines. We erased faces behind file folders. We silenced grief behind medical jargon. Each chart we filled, each injection we administered, built another wall inside us, thick, gray, impenetrable. A wall designed not to keep them safe, but to keep us from feeling. It became a ritual. You washed your hands, you put on the gloves. You looked past the trembling child strapped to the examination chair. You focused only on the checklist, clipped to the stainless steel tray. Temperature logged, skin tone noted, infection site clean. Never mind the wide, pleading eyes. Never mind the small fists that clenched and unclenched beneath the restraints. Focus on the task. Forget the body attached to it. It worked. After a while, it worked too well. The same child you had cradled in the first weeks, promising yourself you would protect them, became just another data point. Just another statistic in the race to find something, anything, that would justify what we were doing. I remember the first time I walked past a collapsed child in the corridor and didn't stop. Didn't feel the jolt of panic. Didn't even turn my head. The nurses would handle it, I told myself. The charts would explain it later. I had other duties, other units to monitor, other subjects to prepare. I told myself this was mercy, that if I didn't feel it, it wasn't happening. And we weren't alone. You could see it in the way the orderlies joked over meals, laughing too loud, their voices brittle with something they couldn't name. You could see it in the way the doctors wrote their reports, clinical, detached, never once mentioning the smell of rot, the brittle sound of bones against metal, the dreams that woke us gasping long after we left the wards. We were drowning, and the only way to survive was to forget we were surrounded by bodies. Not dead, not yet, but emptied out piece by piece, day after day. It wasn't just the children we stripped of identity, it was ourselves. Every time we turned away, every time we said it was necessary, every time we chose not to see, we whittled ourselves down into creatures of process, not compassion. Machines that charted decline with steady hands and colder hearts. There were moments, brief and sharp as broken glass, when the forgetting would falter. When a child would reach out just for a second, grabbing a sleeve, a wrist, a hand, eyes wide, mouth open, voiceless in their need, and for a heartbeat, the wall inside would crack, memory would flood in. You would see them as they were, as they should have been, and it would burn. But you learned to close the door fast, you learned to walk faster, you learned to wash your hands longer, harder, until the skin peeled, anything to scrape off the feeling. Anything to survive another day in a place built on the slow, deliberate burial of empathy. We told ourselves the end would justify the means. That if we found the cure, if we learned enough, if we just endured, it would all mean something. But meaning rotted faster than flesh in Willowbrook, and by the time we realized it, there was almost nothing left inside us worth saving. It was supposed to make it easier. That's what they said when the first trays arrived. Rows of small paper cups, each filled with chocolate milk, lined up like offerings in a silent chapel. We were told it was harmless, that they wouldn't know, that it would be better this way. I carried the trays down the halls, past the cracked tiles and the leaking ceilings, past the stench of bleach that never quite masked the deeper rot beneath the walls. Children sat waiting at long tables, their heads bowed, their hands nervously clutching at their sleeves. Some smiled when they saw me coming. Some reached out with the eager trust that only the very young still carried. They thought it was a treat, something kind in a place where kindness had been reduced to a rumor. I handed out the cups one by one, smiling, nodding, lying. The milk was laced, mixed with feces taken from infected children, designed to ensure transmission, to make sure the experiment had what it needed, subjects properly exposed, data properly collected. We didn't inject them directly, not at first. We let them drink it down themselves. We told ourselves it was necessary. We told ourselves they would get sick anyway, given the conditions, the overcrowding, the filth, the systemic neglect. We told ourselves a lot of things, that it was better this way, that it was painless, that the chocolate masked the bitterness of betrayal. I can still see their faces if I close my eyes, the way some of them smiled after the first sip. The way others grimaced but drank anyway, because refusing food meant punishment, and hunger gnawed deeper than fear. We marked it all down. Which ones finished their cups? Which ones needed coaxing? Which ones vomited afterward, retching onto the cracked linoleum while we made neat little notes about adverse ingestion reactions? Some of them fell ill within hours, some took days. But it always came. The fever, the swelling, the skin yellowing like old paper left too long in the sun. I remember one boy, small, sharp-eyed, quicker than most. He hesitated when handed the cup, looked up at me with something ancient in his gaze, something that knew. He drank anyway, because what choice did he have? He was found convulsing in his bed 2 nights later. I logged the incident with the others. No deviation, within expected parameters, no special notation. It was easier that way. We told ourselves it wasn't personal, but it was. Every smile we accepted, every trust we betrayed, every small hand reaching out for what we offered. They weren't test subjects, they were children, and we poisoned them with promises wrapped in sweetness. There were rumors among the staff, quiet ones, whispers in the supply rooms, the stairwells. Some said they had seen the preliminary reports, said the exposure rates were higher than expected, said the symptoms were worse than predicted. Some said it didn't matter. The research was too valuable. The papers were already being prepared. Progress, after all, demands sacrifice, and it was easier to demand sacrifice from those who had no voice left to object. We stopped thinking of it as betrayal, started thinking of it as inevitability. The milk made it easier for them to swallow, easier for us to forget, but not forever. Late at night, when the wards grew quiet and only the ragged breathing of the sick filled the spaces between, I would hear the ghost of laughter, the echoes of that first day when they thought we were giving them something kind, and I would remember their hands, sticky with chocolate, reaching for more, reaching for something they would never receive. Trust had a flavor in Willowbrook. It tasted like chocolate milk, and it rotted just as quickly as the promises we served. At first, the halls were filled with noise, crying, moaning, sometimes even laughter, a thin, strained version of it, bubbling up from the younger ones who still believed there was something to laugh about. It was easier, in a way. Noise meant life. Noise meant there was still something fighting inside their fragile bodies. But over time, the noise changed. It thinned out, faded, and the silence that replaced it was worse than any scream. The wards grew quieter each month, fewer footsteps, fewer voices calling out from beds crammed too close together, fewer hands reaching for comfort that would never come. We told ourselves it was because the infections were slowing, that the studies were working, that the children were stabilizing. But the truth was simpler. They were giving up. One by one, they learned that no one was coming to rescue them, that no amount of crying would change the trays of poisoned milk, the endless prodding, the bruising needles, the cold hands masked in clinical detachment. Their silence wasn't recovery. It was resignation. I began to dread the quiet. It would build in the wards like fog, clinging to the peeling paint, seeping into the tiles, wrapping itself around my chest until I struggled to breathe. Sometimes I would linger at the edge of a room, clipboard clutched tight, waiting, hoping for a sound, a cough, a murmur, a plea, anything, but often there was nothing, just the steady, rhythmic rattle of lungs giving up. The slow shuffle of small bodies too weak to rise, the heavy, oppressive weight of 1,000 stolen voices. I learned to walk differently, softer, as if I could sneak past the silence without disturbing it, as if acknowledging it would make it real. The other staff changed too. We spoke less, moved faster, rarely made eye contact, even with each other. Conversations became transactions, chart updates, medication requests, mortality reports. Each word another brick in the wall we had built around ourselves. I found myself whispering sometimes without meaning to, whispering apologies under my breath as I passed rows of vacant stares. It wasn't for them, it was for me. A desperate attempt to convince myself that I still remembered how to speak kindness, even if only to the walls. Some days, I sat with the charts long after my shift had ended, just to avoid walking back through the wards, just to avoid seeing the spaces where beds had been stripped bare overnight. No announcements were made, no memorials, no ceremonies, no farewells. The beds were simply emptied. New children arrived to fill the gaps. The cycle continued, and the silence grew louder. I began dreaming in that silence, waking with the weight of it pressing against my ribs, hearing the echoes of voices I could no longer remember, voices that once called out in trust, in fear, in desperate hope, gone now, absorbed into the building itself, into the cracked walls, into the poisoned soil outside. We used to say that Willowbrook was a school, a hospital, a place of treatment. But by the end, it wasn't a place at all. It was a sound, a silence so vast it swallowed names, faces, histories whole. A silence that clung to every surface, every breath, every heartbeat. A silence that reminded us, even when we tried to forget, what we had taken, what we had broken, what we had willingly helped to erase. And no matter how many new papers they gave us, no matter how many new names they stamped onto our files, we would carry that silence with us forever. Because the silence of Willowbrook was not absence, it was memory. And it grew louder every time we tried to leave it behind. For a long time, I told myself I wasn't responsible. I wasn't the one who designed the protocols. I wasn't the one who decided to turn sickness into science. I wasn't the one who mixed the filth into the milk or forced signatures onto blank consent forms. I was just an assistant, just a pair of hands, just another small cog in a machine that had been running long before I stepped onto the grounds of Willowbrook. But lies rot faster than guilt, and no matter how many times I tried to wash the stain away, it lingered. In the ink of the charts I filled, in the weight of the keys that opened doors meant to stay closed, in the glance of a child who understood in one shattering instant that I was not there to save them. I was part of it. I fed them. I weighed them. I measured their decline and noted their failures as data points. I was the hand that steadied the syringe. I was the voice that said, "Swallow," when the tray of contaminated cups came around. I was the smile they trusted when no one else would look them in the eyes, and I betrayed that trust every single day. The others, my colleagues, the doctors, told themselves different stories. Some said it was better than the streets. Some said the research would save thousands. Some said the children would have died anyway. Maybe they believed it. Maybe, if you tell a lie often enough, it stops sounding like betrayal and starts sounding like mercy. But I remember the first time I saw it clearly. A girl, 6, maybe 7, curled into herself on a bed too small for her shivering frame. She was burning with fever, skin stretched tight across her skull, eyes glassy with pain. When I knelt beside her, clipboard in hand, she did something that shattered every excuse I had built inside myself. She smiled, not because she trusted me anymore, because she was trying to comfort me. She saw the horror on my face, and she smiled to make it easier for me. That's when I knew. This wasn't about survival anymore. It wasn't about science. It wasn't even about them. It was about us, about how much cruelty we could wrap in sterile gloves and technical language, about how many small deaths we could inflict while convincing ourselves we were healers, not executioners. I stayed. I kept working. I kept moving trays and logging reactions and pretending it wasn't personal. Because once you admit you are part of it, you can't unsee it. You can't undo the hands you steadied, the papers you signed, the lives you filed away under Subject 17 and Control Group C. You can only carry it. Every time a child cried out and I wrote down normal distress response, I carved a deeper hollow inside myself. Every time a new bus arrived and I turned away, I helped build the silence that swallowed them whole. I wore a uniform. I followed orders. I told myself I had no choice. But every step I took inside Willowbrook was a choice. Every look I avoided, every word I didn't say, every moment I didn't stop the machine, even when I heard it grinding children into nothing. I was part of it, not by force, not by ignorance, by decision. Small decisions, daily decisions, the kind that seem too small to matter, until you realize they are the mortar that holds up the walls of horror. I used to think the worst part was what we did to them, but it's worse knowing what we did to ourselves. How we carved away empathy with scalpels sharper than anything in the surgical rooms. How we amputated our own humanity in the name of progress. How we turned living, breathing children into numbers on a page and never stopped to count the cost. Willowbrook didn't just consume them, it consumed us. And the echoes of that place, the silence, the whispers, the small broken smiles, they never really left. They still move in the quiet corners of my mind, reminding me with every breath, I was part of it, and part of me never walked out. Willowbrook closed its doors long ago. The beds were stripped, the files boxed up and buried deep in state archives. The halls were sealed behind concrete and rusted locks, as if forgetting could be poured over them like fresh cement. They said it was over, that what happened inside those walls belonged to another era, an unfortunate mistake corrected by progress and better intentions. But the place never let go. Not of me, not of anyone who walked its corridors, not of the children who were left behind without ever truly leaving. I carried Willowbrook with me into every crowded street, every bright room, every quiet moment I tried to reclaim for myself. It clung like a second skin, tight, itchy, invisible to everyone except me. Sometimes in the middle of a perfectly ordinary day, I would catch it. A smell, sterile bleach over something fouler. A sound, a distant cough, thin and wet, like a memory trying to breathe. And just like that, I was back there, walking between beds where small, shivering bodies tried to become invisible, holding trays of poisoned kindness, filling charts with tidy lies. Time didn't erode Willowbrook, it calcified it, preserved it inside the walls of the mind, where memory becomes more vivid than reality ever dared to be. I found ways to pretend. I built a new life, a new name, a new story to tell at polite dinner parties when someone asked, "And what do you do?" But behind every answer was the truth. I was a man who once stood in a place built on silence, who watched innocence wither under fluorescent lights, who helped not by action alone, but by the choices I didn't make, the voices I didn't raise. The thing about a place like Willowbrook is that it doesn't need your loyalty forever, just long enough to teach you that mercy is a myth, that some cries will always go unanswered, that some silences are deserved. I still dream of the corridors, but they are different now. In the dreams, they stretch longer than physics should allow, endless hallways of rusted beds and peeling walls, doors with no handles, windows that open only onto thicker darkness, and somewhere, always just ahead, the sound of small feet shuffling, the weight of missing names pressing against the edges of hearing. I never reach them, I never call out. Some part of me knows they are not waiting to be saved. They are waiting to see if I'll admit what I did. If I'll admit that even after the syringes were capped and the files closed, I carried Willowbrook forward, etched into the marrow of who I became. The place didn't end when the doors were padlocked. It didn't end when the headlines moved on or the lawsuits were settled. It lived. It still lives, in the thin lines of hesitation when I pass a hospital, in the sick twist of my stomach when I hear the word experiment, in the way I flinch at the smell of old antiseptic, the sharp clatter of metal trays, the flicker of fluorescent lights. They said Willowbrook closed, but it closed around us, tight, final, eternal. We weren't its caretakers, we were its prisoners, bound not by walls or keys, but by the terrible knowledge of what we chose to become when nobody was watching. And though the world moves on, new buildings, new studies, new children labeled with different codes, the shape of what we lost there, what we stole, what we broke, casts a shadow longer than any one lifetime. I carry it with me, in my breath, in my dreams, in the silent spaces between every word I do not say. Because once Willowbrook touched you, it didn't matter where you went, you never really left. I don't tell these stories to seek forgiveness. There's none left to find. The children of Willowbrook are gone. But sometimes, if you stand too long in the stillness, between the hum of fluorescent lights, in the echo of abandoned hallways, you'll feel it. A weight, a presence. Not angry, not cruel, just watching, waiting. They aren't looking for apologies, they aren't asking for justice. They are the quiet reminder of what happens when mercy is replaced by method, when trust is poisoned with promises too sweet to refuse. And if you ever feel a chill pass over your shoulder where no wind blows, if you ever sense unseen eyes following your steps through a crowd, maybe it's them. Maybe it's the ones we left behind, still reaching, still remembering, still holding on in the only way they can. And maybe if you listen closely enough, you'll hear them too.